joining here this morning. Yeah, we're going to cover some basics about the Vermont Energy Code, the Residential Energy Code, and then also try to incorporate some aspects of some things in the real estate market that you may be aware of already, but otherwise, if not aware of, how they relate to building labeling and evaluating the components of buildings that relate to energy efficiency. So I'm going to be sharing content with you today that is directly from the Vermont Energy Code, and that content is copyrighted by the International Code Council. So just acknowledging that here at the outset. I'm also going to be sharing some content and slides from the Department of Energy's Better Homes program, which really gets into some more of the considerations as far as looking at ways to evaluate the energy efficiency and those sorts of aspects of a home in relation to its real estate value and marketing in the real estate market. Not really my area of expertise, but that is why I brought in that content from the Department of Energy as it relates to your work and your area. And hopefully we can leave you here today with some new information, good information, some context around what you need to be aware of as it relates to the energy code and how this comes into play in the real estate market. So as we'll get into the fact that we do have this code, which is a statute here in Vermont that needs to be followed. Outside of that requirement, the aspects of what the energy codes do address are the building operations and the efficiency of the buildings that we are building, maintaining, and modifying here in our built environment, and the impact of the operations of those buildings has on the overall energy sector in our country. So, you know, how we build and operate buildings is a substantial part of the overall energy profile of our economy. And so there's a lot of things that can be influenced by building right or building unaware. So really what the codes try to address is a framework for how to build buildings that are efficient, affordable, and importantly, durable and healthy to the occupants that will live in those buildings and use those buildings. That's the general context for the buildings we're talking about here. And we're also in the codes and just in general in the middle of and experiencing an energy transition. The framework for how energy was delivered to buildings from the initial days of an energy infrastructure being built in this country obviously is showing its age at this point and needing to be updated and modified. The profile of what we use and how we generate energy has changed significantly as well now too. We're moving away from large-scale generation that is remote and being then transmitted across long distances to end use, and looking at more localized generation of energy and needs, and then the impact that has on the buildings that we operate. So we're also transitioning not just in how the energy is delivered, but with what sources we're using for energy in our buildings. Renewables obviously becoming a much bigger part of that component. That kind of ebbs and flows for how important it is as a policy in this country, but you know, the transition is well underway at this point, and the buildings and the equipment being used in these buildings is adapting to that reality. And so to kind of just contextualize where we're at, where we came from in this space, you know, as this transition occurs, we are going from, you know, the buildings that are a part of the fabric of our you know, communities around here, of homes that were built 200, 300 years ago, that were built with materials found on site and regionally. These are very simple buildings, simple, you know, options for conditioning those buildings. So, you know, buildings that are the initial parts of our built environment here were simple but uncomfortable buildings that took a tremendous amount of energy to keep the fickle little human occupants inside comfortable, which is probably arguable, and alive essentially during cold winters and hot summers. So, you know, the amount of energy that it took to keep the shelter intact was significant. As we transitioned into the 20th century, and we had a huge shift in the paradigm of how buildings were built and operated, materials and options for materials and equipment expanded rapidly, somewhat at a pace where we didn't quite know the impacts of one against the other as new things and new products and new approaches came to the market. So our buildings became much more comfortable than the buildings of our forebears, but the buildings at the same time obviously became much more complex. And as existing buildings were adapted to and new equipment was incorporated into these buildings, you can end up with a lot of buildings that are quite complicated, still take a lot of energy to keep the occupants comfortable. But we did gain more control over the building and over the building envelope during this time and during this transition. But as we've evolved into the 21st century here, a lot of learning and takeaways from the complexity of the past century and approaches taken to how buildings are put together have allowed us to come forth with a more basic and simplified approach to take with putting buildings together structurally, the vital components of what makes buildings durable and comfortable, and then also the mechanical side of things, how we can, the impacts of better buildings themselves, better building envelopes, building shells, allows for much more simple and efficient mechanical systems to be installed, better cooling, better heating, better ventilation, better hot water use. So we're at a point where we're able to build much better than we have in the past, new, but also take into account how to adapt these sorts of new approaches and new options into existing buildings as well. And so as we've made buildings more energy efficient and taking less energy and much less inputs to keep the occupants comfortable, as a result, built right and built to code, we end up with better indoor air quality, obviously much more control over the comfort in the building, swings that can occur throughout the season and season over season. And again, when specified and built right, the high durability of the building is improved. So we have less chances of building assemblies being damaged or rotting away. There's a lot of complexities that occurred in the second half of the 20th century where we didn't quite understand the impacts of the materials and the approaches being taken when putting building envelopes together. And a lot of embedded problems were put into those buildings, and we're now on the other side of that, thankfully, where we understand the dynamics at play much more fully, and we can build much more durable buildings. So by doing so, we're reducing the significant components that impact comfort, building durability, and indoor air quality. So how does this impact the real estate market, and what impacts can more efficient buildings have? Obviously the comfort piece for the occupants, for a buyer or someone living in a home. The more comfortable you are, the more stand to spend more time or stay longer in those buildings. Or even if you're a landlord and a renter, if you have an affordable and comfortable apartment or building that you're renting, your tenants will probably stay a lot longer and reduce your turnover. So obviously affordability has a huge impact with more efficient buildings. There's opportunity for growth of local jobs in maintaining and installing new equipment and modifying buildings. And if you have a pretty well-built building envelope, as I said, you have less swings from season to season as far as comfort goes and energy inputs. So there's more stability that can be planned for and what to expect to have to pay for those energy sources year over year. And again, the indoor air quality piece of things is significant as well. If you're not building a building with the understanding of how components interact with each other and the building science actual side of putting buildings together, which is basically what the code is built on, then you can have some significant problems with indoor air quality, and that impact on occupants is substantial and far-reaching. So an efficient home is a healthy home. So when it shows up on the financial side of things, there are a lot of studies that have been done, and this is, as I said, content from the Department of Energy's Better Buildings program. Um, there's, and not just anecdotal, but actual verifiable data from different surveys and different aspects of market research that have been done that show the impact of either building more efficient buildings and the comparative cost of operating those buildings from one to another, as well as retrofits and improvements and retrofits that can be made to existing homes. So these are just some examples of some studies that have been done to quantify the impact of energy efficiency. This report goes back to, I think, 2017 or 2018, so it's some of the content or data can be a little dated at this point, but the crux of it being the percentages here and the overall comparative savings at the time that these studies were implemented. And just some anecdotes here or examples here of components of some of those studies of the impacts that were felt throughout the country. So not just a regional impact here. It's not just that there's one aspect or one section of the country that is more influenced by these sorts of impacts on efficiency, but that this is something that carries across the country in different markets and different regions. The cost of heating, cooling, and operating our homes is going to have different influences depending on where you are in the country. But the bottom line is still, the better the building shell, the better the building envelope, the more efficient that it is, the less it's going to cost to operate that building. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes here just looking at the retrofit side of things. So, when a lot of our real estate market here in Vermont is dealing in existing homes. New construction occurs more significantly in certain parts of the state than others. Where I live down here in Shrewsbury and Rutland County, it's definitely not the same housing market as it is up in Chittenden County and Essex and Winooski and South Burlington and those areas. It's certainly not the same level of development that we're talking about here. So a lot of what we're seeing around the state beyond that sort of economic hub up in the greater Burlington area is working with existing buildings. So there's things that many of us who live in these buildings have just come to accept over time. As I noted in the slide before, the transition of how buildings were built century over century. If you're living in an older home, you kind of can get used to being uncomfortable and get used to high bills and actually making yourself more uncomfortable as a result of having those high bills. And then, indoor air quality can be a real problem in these buildings as well. So, the existing conditions of these buildings will yield to a lot of opportunity for improvement. So if you're building a new home or if you are taking a substantial step into renovating or retrofitting an existing home, you can, with the right steps and with the right construction professionals and expertise, get much better control over the building envelope and improve comfort, mitigate risk of building damage, to components of the building that were vulnerable due to the fact of them having a lot of air leakage moving through the building and moisture problems. A skilled retrofit by a skilled professional can mitigate the impacts of moisture on buildings and the potential for damage and make the occupants much more comfortable while lowering energy bills and improving indoor air quality as a result. Another aspect of this work is paying attention to how we actually physically heat these homes and the combustion equipment that is in existing buildings. Maintenance over time can be spotty. There are definitely new options and new ways that we can condition our homes that are less harmful and less impactful than legacy fossil fuel systems. but we are not at a point where we are fully transitioned away, nor are we fully transitioning away from fossil fuel systems. So understanding the impact of of that equipment existing in our homes is a key aspect when retrofitting buildings, really paying attention to how that equipment's working, making sure it's not causing problems and risk of health impacts to the occupants, while also maintaining that equipment to run as efficiently as possible. So options to retrofit homes, this is incremental work. This is not something that needs to be an all or nothing approach. There's a lot of opportunities or reasons why someone might seek to take the steps towards an energy retrofit, either over time or in a significant project. But there's other aspects of impact to how we use our buildings that can coexist with the opportunities for energy retrofits. So if you've got a roof that needs to be replaced because the shingles are shot, it's a huge opportunity to address the insulation in that roof system at the same time. Residing the house, either because the house siding is fallen apart and needs to be replaced, or just from an aesthetic standpoint, again, that opens up access to the wall cavities and or the opportunity for adding insulation outboard of the building. So, these are all, and other things here, changes in how the family uses the home, looking to stay in a home as you age and needing to modify the building for access. A lot of different reasons that you can look into the bigger picture here of retrofit when other maintenance work is required on the home. So just some examples of that level of thinking about how to get to a more efficient building, residing the house and adding insulation. Insulating the foundation is a huge step to improve comfort in the home, as well as reduce the potential of humidity and dampness in the home. If you insulate a foundation, you mitigate the potential of the formation of condensation and humidity in the summer months, not just in the impact of that in the winter. Retrofitting a building, especially the top of the building, for from an insulation standpoint, can also open up the opportunity to create new usable space, right? Transitioning a open attic or an unfinished second floor or third floor into living space while incorporating really good air sealing and insulation measures into that will, overall improve the comfort and reduce energy use while creating more space to live in the home. Placing windows, putting in ventilation systems. I think that's a bigger thing that's showing up in the market now as we're working on buildings that are 15, 20, 30 years old, 40 years old at this point, that were not, when they were built, did not have ventilation systems incorporated into the building, where now they really can and should. So just looking at things to be holistic over the long term. From the real estate standpoint too, that it can be motivations from a seller standpoint if they're not planning on spending a long time in the home, or so it doesn't just have to be a long-term investment. There are short-term investments that can happen as well. So again, just a couple slides kind of driving that point home. It's a path and it's a journey towards these intensive net zero, which is something that the Energy Code is actually iterating towards, as the state of Vermont's overall energy and climate plan has defined that the state's objective goal is to eventually get to net zero construction for both the residential and the commercial market in the years to come. And so when we're talking about how that will impact existing buildings, again, it's not an either or an all in. It's a path to improvement and a path to better efficiency over time. I'll just pause to see if there's any questions now before I get into the code content itself.
Thanks, Steve. Folks can put questions in the chat or raise your hand and we can take you off mute.
Okay. The dog will stop barking in just a moment.
We can't hear it.
Okay, good. My spouse just came back home, so he's just welcoming her at the moment.
Think you're good to go.
All right. So Vermont Residential Building Energy Standard, or the Vermont RBES. This is the state of Vermont's Residential Building Energy Code. To just lay the context for why this code exists. So the Energy Code is a component of the overall residential building code that is published by the International Code Council. So the International Residential Code is basically the big whole building code. The state of Vermont did not adopt that in whole. They adopted the aspect of the energy provisions of the code. We'll get into that in a moment. So what that aspect of the code covers is how the building shell is put together from insulation, air sealing, and vapor control sort of approach. It really is talking about how does how are the impacts of physics essentially impacting the building shell that we create. So, we need to look at how buildings operate as a system. Any new building is put together of thousands and thousands of components, and all of them need to be detailed appropriately, and the different assemblies in the whole of the building need to get along with each other, essentially. If you do not understand the basics of building science and material choice and how the code addresses those, you can end up building unintentionally a building envelope. When I say building envelope, walls, roof, foundation, etc., that can be very susceptible to damage over time. And potentially that duration of time can be quite short, a matter of 10 years, 15 years, with a building that was not built with the tenets of the code and building science put into place. You can see some very significant damage as a result of that. And unfortunately, that is what has shown up from some of the housing stock that was built over the last 30 or 40 years. Again, as new materials and approaches came into play, and the building community was not well versed in the interaction of these materials and how they needed to be put together appropriately. So that is really what the energy code really tries to address and get into. So when you step back and think about how this all comes together, it's the interaction of all these parts here, from top to bottom of the building, the transitions from different components of the building, the mechanical components, how they impact indoor air quality, and the drive of air, moisture, and heat energy into building components. So it is a complex system, but if you can understand the aspects of building science, you can break it down into layers and components that are more straightforward to understand. And then as long as you understand those concepts and how to put them into play into each component of the building, you can get a holistic whole that will be durable, healthy, and efficient. So this is kind of just a breakdown of what we are talking about when talking about the building envelope and the aspects of the code that define the requirements for the building envelope. So it's not just the building envelope, again, it's the building as a system. So on top of the requirements and the considerations for compatibility for the building envelope, there are also in the energy code requirements and definitions of interactions for mechanical equipment. So heating, cooling, domestic hot water, ventilation. These are all aspects of building as a whole that are addressed in the energy code. So we're going to talk specifically about the residential code here today. The state of Vermont also adopted a commercial energy code at the same time that they adopted the residential code. So these codes have been in place since the legislature created the statute in 1997. And the codes are updated on a regular cycle. And that is a process that is initiated by the International Code Council as they update their energy codes on a regular basis. And Vermont has followed typically a 3-year cycle of updating both the residential and the commercial codes. So following that cycle, right now, we are, as of July 1st of last year, we are operating under the 2024 Vermont RBES. So any project that was started, basically that means when the hole is dug and footings are being laid out, that is considered date of construction commencement. And so any building that would have started as of July 1st last year or after needs to meet the 2024 Vermont RBES. So what does the energy code cover? Again, it's a code of basically minimum energy efficiency, building durability, and indoor air quality requirements for new buildings and renovations. So there's two aspects to the code. The bulk of what the code requires is the standards for construction, everything I was just talking about. How do you put the building together and how does everything interact? And then there's a certification requirement. And so basically the certification requirement is documentation of how and in what way the building was built or modified to meet the energy codes. So obviously all the things I've just discussed are kind of fundamental to the rationale of why we have energy codes in the first place: building durability, indoor uh, uh, quality of life for the occupants, affordability, efficiency, et cetera. But it also does have impact at a macro scale as well too, when you start to think about the housing stock in our communities. If you have poorly built housing stock that has inherent uh, potential for damage built into it, where those buildings are going to have substantial um, structural or physical problems that will need to be remedied or replaced over time. And the cost of doing so is a huge burden. Obviously, everything's expensive when it comes to construction and just about anything else at this point. But if you have buildings that are not built to the code, are not built with any understanding of how building science works and interacts in these buildings, and the housing stock in your community starts to, as a whole, degrade because of the damage being occurred and the occupants of those homes and property owners not being able to afford to fix and maintain them, that does have an impact on the overall brand list and the economy of the local community as well too. So it's a big picture as well as a small picture impact of the codes. And the way that the statute was written here, implementing the energy codes in Vermont, is that the homeowner, it's up to the builder, architect, or engineer, whoever it is that was defining the aspects of the building as they need to meet the code, and who actually constructed the home. It is up to them to know and understand, follow, and document that the house was built to meet the code. There is not a enforcement mechanism in place in the state of Vermont as it's associated with this code. So there are not code officials that are inspecting single family residential homes. There are aspects of the rental market. So anything that is more than a duplex, essentially, any other type of rental situation, the Vermont Department of Fire Safety does have some jurisdiction for certain aspects of the codes as it relates to their provisions. But single family homes, there is no code enforcement, there's no code oversight. If there ever is or will be, it's going to be taken at the local level. So there is some code inspection that occurs in South Burlington and some other communities that have chosen to do that locally. But overall, it's a self-verifying code by the builder, and the homeowner can take civil action against the builder for not meeting the energy code if that is discovered upon occupancy of the home, and or any damages or claims that could be associated with noncompliance to the code. So that is kind of the teeth of the code. Now, that being said, there's a statute here of 6 years. So claims must be filed within 6 years of project completion for a claim of non-compliance with the energy code. But that doesn't mean that at 10 years, if one whole side of the building has had all of the siding and the sheathing rot away, that the builder is not liable for remedying that issue. There is no statute of repose in Vermont for damages incurred to a homeowner on a building. So that means the builder is liable for any of those damages that could occur over the long term. It just means at that point that it's not going to be a claim against the builder for non-code compliance. It's going to be a claim against the builder for the damage incurred to the building. So one thing to just make clear as it relates to real estate transactions, there is a requirement for the projects to meet the code and for a code certificate to be completed to verify that it was built to the code. But if that code certificate was not filed appropriately with the town and with the state, that does not cloud the title for the building. So the sale can still go through. It could impact the choice of the buyer to want to buy the home if it can't be verified that it met the code. Some banks we're learning or hearing from will not issue or underwrite a mortgage if that code certificate does not exist. So it's not uncommon to for us to hear from a builder or a homeowner who's been in a home for 10 years and is trying to sell the home. They don't have a code certificate. And now they're trying to find a way to get a code certificate for that home 10 years after the fact. So much better to be able to have that done appropriately from the get-go rather than to try to claw that back at a later date. Another aspect of how this can impact real estate transactions is that the state passed another provision a few years ago that requires at any point the way that the code works is a code certificate is required to be filed at the town office somewhere in town record in the town that the house was built. Now, if the town that the house was built in issues certificate of occupancy for single family homes, the town cannot issue that CO without having received and filed a completed RBES certificate. So that's another thing that holds things up. And we hear from, again, homeowners and or builders that the house is complete. Town won't let the owner of the home move in because there's no code certificate. And then the builder is trying to figure out how to fill out a code certificate and doesn't know whether or not they've actually met the code. So this is something that is more impactful now than it has been in the past. Kind of covered this already as far as the authority having jurisdiction, the impact of code oversight here in the state. So the residential code does have provisions for both new and existing homes. So most of the code is really written towards affecting and implementing aspects of design and construction for new buildings. But the code does relate to aspects of existing buildings where you are renovating or replacing or modifying existing building envelope components, primarily the building shell, and also mechanical components, replacement of mechanical equipment in the home. But as the code is written for new construction, it applies to 1 and 2 family homes. It is required for multifamily housing that is 3 or more dwelling units and 3 stories or less in height. If it's taller than that, that falls into the commercial code side of things. It does not include commercial buildings, but there are aspects where you have a mixed use building where both the residential and the commercial code would come into play. That being if there's a ground level, street level retail space, and then 2 floors of condominiums or apartments above, that would be a building type where the commercial code would come into place for the ground level retail space, and then the residential code would come into play for those apartments above. For the 2024 code, the tiny houses are now recognized as its own standalone building category, and there are different specific building envelope requirements, mechanical requirements for those types of buildings. Code also applies to additions. So only the addition needs to conform. The rest of the building that it's attached to does not need to be quote unquote brought up to code. And additions are basically treated as new construction. So any addition would need to meet the code as if you were building a new house. Renovations and alterations, there are aspects that of code is required there and those types of projects. And that's covered in a separate chapter in the energy code. And another thing to be aware of too is the impact of stretch code. There's a base code that needs to be followed, which is just base standard minimum requirements for any construction that lands in these categories. And then the stretch code is a higher level and higher standard of performance that needs to be met for any projects that fall under Act 250. And so this is where if you have a development that's being that we're talking about here, where a lot was subdivided into multiple housing lots, new homes being built on those lots, that's a scenario where those new buildings would need to meet the stretch code rather than just the base code. And the stretch code is also an option for towns to adopt as their local code as a higher standard of performance. And that's available to any town in the state of Vermont. And currently, South Burlington is the only municipality that has adopted stretch code as their local requirement. So if a house is being built in South Burlington, they are checking for and requiring that it meets the stretch code, not just the base code. There are exemptions to the requirements of the code. This is a residential building code. So the residential definition is what really triggers requirements for compliance here. So it does not apply to unconditioned buildings. That's, a garden shed, a detached, unconditioned, unheated garage. Mobile homes have their own federal requirements and specifications for construction. So that would be any sort of home built on a movable chassis. This is not modular homes. Modular homes need to meet the code fully. But mobile homes have their own requirements federally. Hunting camps, seasonal camps, camps that do, buildings that were not built for year-round occupancy do not have a distributed heating system in the building, were not meant to be lived in year-round. Those are exempt. Yurts are called out as its own category. And then also owner-built homes. So this is a category and a distinction in the code that allows a individual who is going to build and occupy their own home to be exempt from meeting the full requirements of the code. It's a very narrow definition that cannot be used by like someone who's flipping homes or a spec builder. So if you're a builder and you're building a new home and you're going to finish the home and then put it on the market to sell, this does not apply to you. That is intended to be the owner of the home being the person who defines the specs for the building and then will live in the building upon completion. It's still, the intent here is that the owner builder would meet the requirements of the code and document as such. But again, if they are exempt from meeting the full technical requirements of the code, but they are required to document in writing on the code certificate what aspects of the building, all the aspects of the building as built, and whether they're compliant with the code or not. And I'll show an example here of those code certificates here a little bit further on. So what exactly does the code cover? It's a lot. Again, it's the aspects of how the building shell and the mechanical systems and ventilation systems are all put together, and how the interactions are between different layers in those assemblies. So a lot of things that are defined in the code. Chapter 4 of the Energy Code is where the bulk of this content lives. So there are a lot of details to be followed. Mostly what a lot of the building community understands and knows about the code at a very high level or surface level are the R values of the building assemblies that are called out in the code. That's one aspect, but it's not the holistic aspect of the code, and that is why it's good and it's important to understand the big picture here of what the code requires and how all of these different things interact, not just what the R values, quote unquote, need to be for the walls, the roof, the foundation, etc. It's much deeper than that. So as you navigate the code, you need to comply with the technical aspects of the code and then document it, file the code certificate. The code gives 3 different pathways to comply with the code. This package plus points is what's called a prescriptive approach, which is kind of the default mechanism for code compliance and what most of the construction industry recognizes and acknowledges for what the code requires. It's a basic package that defines what the different components need to be from an R value or assembly standpoint, window values, et cetera. And then based on the size of the building, there are aspects of the building that need to be made more efficient. The bigger the building, the more efficient it needs to be, essentially. This is intended to be an easy kind of self-verifying option for a builder to choose that does not require to going into depth on anything about modeling performance of the building or working with a third party. It's meant for the builder to be able to relatively easily navigate on their own. Second option here is starting to model the performance of the building, doing actual calculations of the different assemblies of the building, and then doing a comparative analysis to a code-built home. Basically, you model your intended build and specifications in a software, web-based software maintained by the Department of Energy. And then that is compared against what a code-built standard home would be. And the evaluation comes from there. And then finally, the third option, which is most relevant to the real estate market here as well, too, is working with a third-party HERS rater. And this is a much more detailed level of energy modeling, operational modeling of the building. So understanding how much the building is, how much building energy is going to be used annually for the building. That is a part of the process of modeling here and when documentation. And this is also something that will show up on MLS listings, and it's a comparative analysis of energy efficiency from one building to another. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail here in a moment, but these are the three ways that compliance can be shown with the code. So just as examples for this, so the prescriptive package plus points option, this is the table that a builder would see in the code that tells them what the minimum performance requirements need to be for the different parts of the building shell. So the ceiling, whether it's a flat ceiling or a slope ceiling, above grade framed walls, any framed floor systems, foundation wall insulation, slab insulation, windows, skylights, doors, etc. So this is prescribed performance. These are the minimums that need to be met for the different components of the building. As I note here, this is the non-negotiables when a builder is working with the client. These are the things that just have to be met and that the builder is accountable for. These are not things that you can give a homeowner the option to comply with or not, because if they don't, it is not up to the homeowner, it's up to the builder, and the builder needs to be just meeting these minimum performance standards, no matter what else happens with the building design. Here's the points table that comes from the prescriptive option. So the performance specifications, as I shared in that last slide from that table, carry for both base code and stretch code. The difference here is if you need to meet stretch code, you have to earn a higher number of points than you would if you were building a base code home. The points table of options to make the building more efficient is very broad. It takes into account doing things that are better than minimum for the building envelope in that table previously shared, but it also there are also ways to earn a lot of points by putting in higher efficiency heating, cooling equipment, water heating. It addresses water use in the building as well, fixtures. It accounts for renewable energy incorporated into the building. So the points options are broad, and they're all intended to increase baseline efficiency. So that's, again, one option. The other one of the two modeling options, again, here is using the ResChecked software. So this is the comparative analysis I was mentioning, using the web-based ResCheck tool and software that can be found from the DOE's website. Now, this is, again, something that a builder is intended for the builder or architect, engineer to use. They can go in and create an account with the tool and then build out projects, build out buildings in the tool. You do have to know a lot of details about the building. You have to break down the building into components that are then all modeled out individually. And then this is an example of the output from using the ResCheck tool, a compliance certificate that will show all of the inputs that you've modeled out for the building, the areas, surface areas of those components, and then what the performance specs were of those components, and whether or not, as designed, as input into the tool, the building is compliant or not. And then this is a certificate that would then be used to be filed along with the code certificate as well. This would be an attachment to the code certificate showing the compliance pathway that was used. And then the third pathway, again, here is now working with a third party. And that third party you'd be hiring to do the code compliance for you, essentially, is a HERS rater, a home energy rating score. This is a rated index of 0 to 100. So 0 being essentially a net zero home where there's no energy needed to be brought to that home to operate it over the year, over an annual basis. That is a building that would have renewable energy generation occurring on site or from a net metered sort of scenario. The other end of the scale of 100 would be a home that is highly inefficient comparatively. The score in that range between 0 and 100 for what the Vermont code requires here for the 2024 code is a score of 60 or less for base code, and then 59 or less for stretch code. So anything more than 60 would be a home that would be not efficient enough, not scoring well enough to be compliant with the code. So the lower the score, the better. This takes into account operational energy use in the building. So it's accounting for and generating information on the type of heating and cooling equipment that's used in the home, the type of water heating used in the home, the appliances that are used in the home, the lighting, and it will be calculating what the estimated annual cost of operation of the building would be as well. So this tool was developed by the mortgage industry as a comparative analysis of energy efficiency from home to home, and that is a value and an input that can be generated in an MLS listing. So if a HERS rating is done on a building, either for code compliance or just for the sake of doing a HERS rating, that is a data point that will show up in the listing if it is filed and uploaded to the National Registry. So it's a great way to show code compliance for new construction, and it's also a great way to have a populated listing of that home's energy efficiency in the real estate market. So the process for doing this is the builder or homeowner would be hiring that HERS rater, that energy rater, at the beginning of the project while it's still at design stage, doing that in a preliminary rating where they model out the whole building based on the design. That will tell the builder and the homeowner whether or not what they have planned to build will meet the code or not, or if things need to be changed. It does involve inspections. So this is required to verify that the home was built to meet the code and can be verified by the energy rater, that a inspection occurs after the building envelope is complete, all insulation is installed, and before interior finishes go up. An inspection is required at that point by the rater. And then the rater is also required to come out and do a final inspection and do performance testing on the building as well. So this is in the absence of there being code officials or some sort of local or statewide enforcement mechanism, a rater stands to be the verifier for a building a third-party verifier in taking this approach. And then here's just an example of what a HERS certificate looks like. So this is the data that is generated from that energy modeling. This gives you what the actual HERS score was for the building, the annual savings relative to an average US home. It also breaks down what your costs would be for different operational uses throughout the year because of the level of detail that goes into the rating. And again, this is a certificate that will then be associated with that home moving forward in the registry, coming from the federal level and then showing up in individual regional and local MLS listings. Any questions here?
None have come in at the moment. No.
Okay. Certification side of things. So the intent here is builder chooses a pathway, which of those three they want to use to show compliance with code, build the home to those requirements, complete the full context, and then the code certificate is completed by the builder and or architect, engineer, whomever it is that's been designated as responsible for the outcomes. And then a copy of that certificate is filed with the town for which the building was built, and then also a copy of it filed with the Vermont Department of Public Service, which, I don't think I've mentioned it yet to this point, but the Vermont Department of Public Service is the state agency that is responsible for the energy codes. So that is the state level authority for implementation of the codes, and where a copy of the code certificates need to be filed on record as well. And then the third copy of the code certificate is meant to be left in the home with the homeowner and placed somewhere that it can be easily accessible. Historically, that's been in the mechanical space, in the mechanical room, either on the electric panel or somewhere nearby. So this is just kind of the first of 2 pages of what the code certificate looks like. Information about the building, the section showing which compliance option was chosen to comply with the code, and then the actual certification section here at the bottom, where the builder, architect, engineer is certifying to the owner of the building that the building met the code with one of the 3 methods above, and then the builder is stating and signing the code certificate below that. There's a second page to this code certificate that covers all of the components of the building, where you're actually detailing the as-builts for everything that relates to the energy code. I'm not going to share that here, but this is what the code signature standpoint looks like. The owner builder disclosure statement, as I mentioned earlier, the owner builder is an exempt category here to meeting the full technical requirements of the code, but essentially the code certificate looks the same. And it's just how the certificate is signed that is different here. So the same details about the building are required to be completed, which compliance option was followed to meet the code. And then here at the bottom is basically just a disclosure statement by the owner builder, rather than this bottom section being a certification from the builder to the homeowner. So as it relates to the town officials and at the local zoning or municipal standpoint, the intent of the local officials are, if there's a building permit requirement in that town for a new building or any renovation work, that the town official provide a copy or access to code information at the time that a permit is completed or filed. And that it also providing access to a copy of the code certificate. Many years past, this would have been a physical copy of the code handbook and a physical copy of the code certificate. At this point, I think it's mostly just links to the Department of Public Service website where those documents can be found. But this is required of at the local level when a permit is applied for anything that would fall under the residential building energy standard. At the other end of the project, as I noted earlier, the town is obligated to receive and file a copy of the RBES certificate, filed and completed and signed by the builder before issuing a certificate of occupancy. So if the town issues a CO without filing a code certificate, there can be penalties against the town for having done so. So this last section I'm going to get into here, now that we've kind of covered what the code is and how the code applies to residential buildings here in Vermont, talk about some third-party residential energy efficiency certifications. So these are programs that exist as at both the national and regional level that are above code programs, essentially. These are, again, third-party opportunities for certification that would live with that building and can stand to be market differentials as far as valuation to properties, depending on the housing market and what the presence is of these different programs. But these are all different programs that are in place and active around the country and have been active here in Vermont as well too. So to start off with, here are some of the options for evaluating the energy efficiency of existing homes. So the Department of Energy's Home Energy Score is a program that was developed quite a few years back. It has been used here in Vermont and not as much in recent years. It's been a part of some different programs that both Efficiency Vermont and other agencies have implemented over the years. But essentially, it's a scoring tool that kind of provides a miles per gallon rating for a home as a way for a homeowner or a buyer to compare from one home or another that they're looking at. How affordable is this house going to be for me to live in? What is it going to cost to operate this building year over year? This does the process for generating a home energy score would involve working with a third party who has a full list of details that need to be gathered and evaluated for the home. And then all that data is then input into a scoring tool, and then a home energy score is generated from those inputs and from that process. So this is an example of what the home energy score looks like. It also will, in context, give you examples and ways to improve upon the existing conditions of the building. So this program has been basically intertwined with and dovetailed into weatherization programs and the Home Performance with Energy Star program in the past, as it's an evaluation of what the existing conditions are of the building, and then also mapping towards options for improving aspects of the building that can improve both the score and then also, reduce the cost of operating the building. So the home energy score, this score can show up in a MLS listing as well. There's a section that this will either be, depending on the program and how the home energy score was generated, can either be manually uploaded to that or can already be pre-populated because it was registered and filed in the national database. So that's the home energy score. As an evolution of that, and what is now currently available here in Vermont is the Vermont Home Energy Profile. So this is a version of the home energy score that was developed by a cohort here in Vermont and is administered by the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership and Clearly Energy in Vermont and throughout. I think there's parallel programs in other states in New England as well. So this is the same sort of idea, same sort of pathway where you're working with someone to do a full breakdown of existing conditions of an existing home, what the current situation looks like, current operational costs, energy use, et cetera, and then mapping for a pathway for improvement. So this can give a roadmap to the homeowner of what their options are, what their current state of affairs is, and where they can move towards as far as improvements, or it also can be used by realtors to kind of both highlight improvements that were made on that home as in the evaluation side of things from the seller standpoint, or to be used as a comparative for a buyer to be considerate of their options of cost and affordability when looking at different homes next to each other. So this program is available and happening here in Vermont right now. And in parallel to that, as far as how to approach going after improvements, Efficiency Vermont's home performance program with Energy Star has been around for a very long time and a program that continues today. So this is an opportunity to do comprehensive building energy retrofits. But again, at a scale, it can be both, just doing an attic or in a basement to, improve what's there, or doing the attic, the basement, doing other air sealing in the building, replacing mechanical equipment, and installing ventilation, whole house ventilation where there wasn't any before. So it can be a scale, but it also is an opportunity for a homeowner to be able to get professional assessment of the home, an evaluation again of where they're at right now, what recommended improvements could be valuable to that home and the homeowner, and the fact that there are significant incentives available to help defray the costs for doing that work. Then we are, in this program, is a partner with the Energy Star brand and the Energy Star program. So these are projects that are uploaded to the National Registry there as well too. So you can request a certificate of completion from the Energy Star program for having done a home performance project, but it also can be a data point that shows up in a real estate listing that this home had participated in that program and improvements had been made. So these are some things that I'm sharing from the Department of Energy Better Buildings program uh, that relates to evaluating and populating sections and fields in MLS listing. Not a topic area that I'm very familiar with as far as the process and how these things are added and what the guidelines are around that. But just sharing here some options that are available that are relevant here in Vermont and how they can show up in a listing. So in context to that, depending on the program or the third-party certification that is either being identified in the listing or the homeowner is looking to have show up as a part of the breakdown of that building, it needs to be understood in the context of what that program is intended to provide and how it's intended to evaluate, um, its impact. So just from a real estate professional standpoint, familiarity with how these programs operate definitely yields the outcome of how that then shows up in the listing and what value it means to the consumer. So as some examples here from a HERS rating, if there's a HERS rating done on the home, as we noted, it's a scale of 0 to 100 and what the rating score would be. And the difference between 0 and 100 being that a zero HERS score is a net zero home. That is a home that is very energy efficient and incorporates renewable energy to the point where ideally that home will not cost any money to operate by the occupants because of the low energy consumption in the first place and the renewable energy generation being used to heat and cool that home and operate that home. So a 0 HERS rating is a great score. Conversely, a home energy score is modeled in a different way. So a 0 home energy score would be about the far end of the scale of inefficiency. This is a home that would basically be like living outside. So understanding what the difference is between those two programs and what the difference would be in the score is important to understand for context for how this shows up in property listings. Also, the same thing with Energy Star as well too. There are Energy Star programs for a variety of different things. There's Energy Star for new construction. There's Energy Star for home performance. There's Energy Star appliances. So understanding the context of what is showing up specifically as it relates to that home. And as it's noted here, there are some resources available through DOE that can help you navigate these different programs and how to use the data points that are included from them. Also, if there's a home energy score or some other sort of third-party verification that was done for the home that is not already pre-populated in the MLS listing, you can enter that data here yourself I can't verify that that's actually true or not, but going off the information from DOE, this is an option that can be used if that information is available for the home, but has not been uploaded to the National Registry. But that's something you can talk to your association about further as well too, to understand the impacts of these different third-party programs. This work, there has been in that working group towards the energy labeling program. The impact and feedback was solicited from Vermont Realtors Association. So the industry is aware of these programs, and where adoption stands. Uh, that's something for the organization to decide how to advocate for over the long term. Code support resources. Efficiency Vermont does have a dedicated page to energy code support. So if you go to efficiencyvermont.com, you navigate to the upper right corner of our homepage, you'll find a section for trade partners. And you click into that, that'll take you to our contractor facing sort of website. And if you scroll down onto the main landing page there, you'll see a partner resources section, and energy code support is a subsection you can click into there. That'll take you to a whole listing of different content that we have available. Code support documents, videos, trainings that are all available, and links to the code documents themselves from the Department of Public Service website, ways to access this content. There's also a link to an informational packet or pamphlet that can be used to highlight the most pressing details of the energy code for consumers, for realtors, for municipal officers as well. So can recommend you go check out those resources on our website. We also operate the Energy Code Assistance Center. So this toll-free number you can use to call in and reach us here with any code-related questions. We can help you over the phone. We can set up a more detailed technical assist with an energy consultant to go deeper if necessary or desired. And also the Vermont Department of Public Service can be reached as well. So at that number there, that'll take you to the Energy and Efficiency and Energy Resources Division, and they can handle questions that you may have about the code as well, and from the kind of policy and statute standpoint and interpretation standpoint as well. So that is what I had for content here for you today. I'd be happy to have a long form conversation at this point and answer any questions and get into the weeds if you'd like. So if I can be of any help, we'll stay on here for a bit.
Great. Thanks so much, Steve. I think this is really great content. Adds a lot of valuable detail to real estate professionals and experts. I know I definitely learned a lot. Are there any, if you were to kind of summarize the top 3 things that real estate professionals should, kind of take away with them, what would you say those are?
Well, I think there's just general awareness that this exists. It's something that should be a part of the matrix, both from the realtor standpoint and how this information shows up in a listing, but also just a part of the conversation a realtor can have with their clients, from a seller standpoint, going into setting up, getting a listing onto the market, of getting some background from the homeowner of how aware they are, whether or not their home was built to the code, what documents they may have already in place, and kind of setting the table for that so that there aren't any surprises when there are potential interested parties and buyers that, may be more informed than that building owner may be, to get ahead of that essentially. And so from the realtor standpoint, I think taking advantage of some of the resources that are available to educate yourself on how the code works, what's required, reach out to us with those questions. So setting the stage for that. Also, highlighting the benefits for homeowners who have participated in programs, or if they did participate in the Energy Star new construction program when the house was built, asking those questions, asking whether or not the house went through a weatherization program, either a state program or through the home performance program, and highlighting and documenting that. Well, uh, energy efficient features in the home, more of what I dig into in my training and how I get into things. I'm the energy nerd. I'm a guy who's gotten into the weeds, and we can talk about impacts of more efficient mechanical equipment in the building, how to integrate heat pumps into existing buildings, and improving water use and that sort of thing. So those are things that can increase the value and appeal for properties as well, whether or not they're already in place in the building, and or if it's an opportunity for the seller or the buyer to incorporate into the real estate transaction. So that's another kind of content area that I think realtors can dig into a little bit more as well too, is the impact of new equipment and new technologies that are showing up in the market, and the consumers seem to put a high level of value on. Just so you're aware of what that different type of equipment is, heat pump equipment primarily.
Great. What if folks are, buying a home, they're, doing the title search work and they don't find a certificate amongst the files? What are next steps
Yep.
there?
Yeah, that is a common, somewhat common occurrence that we hear about quite a bit. That is a common question that comes into our code support hotline. So in that scenario, it's typically a title attorney and or a buyer and or a lender that is asking that question. There's a sale that is seeking to go through, purchase of an existing home, and this code certificate, if it was a house built anytime since 1998 on, there should be a code certificate that is discoverable for that property.
Mhm.
And it's not uncommon that for them to not be filed and not be available. So at that point, depending on how old the building is, it could be viable for the owner of that home to seek out the builder that built the home, to try to get a code certificate completed and then filed so it's available. But that can often be very tall hill to climb to make that happen. But as I noted earlier in the content, that as the statute is written, a lack of certificate does not cloud the title for the property. So there's no, obstacle for the transaction to go through and the sale to occur.
Mhm.
It just may have an impact from the buyer to the seller as to, well, what does this mean for the sale price? What does this mean for us as far as negotiations go on the sale? So that is kind of how it would actually show up in the transaction side of things, but it's not a roadblock to the sale occurring.
What are some other resources or tools that would be good to just mention again, that you covered earlier?
Yeah, I think HERS ratings is something, to become more aware of and to seek out some raters actually to discuss what that service entails and the benefits thereof. There are the HERS rating impact on home verifications and real estate valuation is significant in other parts of the country. Even, for example, here in Massachusetts, in recent years, the state of Massachusetts passed in their climate policies kind of not a mandate to, but a significant motivation for municipalities to adopt stretch code, a higher level of performance, and then also as a result of that require HERS ratings to be done on any new construction project. So, in scale, it can be quite impactful on real estate, community and valuation of properties, because it is essentially like looking at the miles per gallon comparison of one car to the other. This
Mhm.
building is going to cost you this much to operate, and it's verified. compared to this other building here. So it really can have a significant, effect on choice, I think, for buyers when they have that data to consider. It's a real impact, from affordability and, operational cost can have a real impact, not just on purchase price, but whether or not can you afford that monthly mortgage plus, monthly operational costs. So looking into the HERS information, I think is valuable. Again, it was developed by the mortgage industry. It's a federal, national registry of properties, so it'll show up on listings, and it's again an apples to apples comparison of building to building with operational performance.
Great. Yeah, I just noticed that realtor.com has probably several articles, but one of the ones that popped up is from 2022 with a title, "What is a HERS index? Putting a number on energy efficiency." So there's definitely additional articles and information out there through channels that real estate professionals in Vermont are already familiar with. So that's it's exciting to see the uptake on that, and the interest in offering that for a tool for buyers and sellers that have invested in energy efficiency work and projects on their homes.
Yeah, it's not just for new construction too. A HERS rating can be done on an existing home as well too. So you can get that data, consolidated and then put out there as an evaluation tool.
That's great. Well, I think with that, we'll wrap things up. This recording, along with our other energy code trainings and webinars, are on our energy code support page. Just navigate to efficiencyvermont.com /trade-partners /energy-code-support. But I did put that in the chat too for folks, and we should actually add that to this final slide so it's easier to see. But thanks for joining us today. Thanks so much, Steve, for the wonderful presentation and great content. Please reach out with any questions. We're here to provide the technical support. So have a great day, and we hope to see you again soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.